The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
I heard that thing anyways, is like a speaker or something like that. I mean, what is up with that? You know?
Have you heard of LifeLock?
LifeLock?
Capture when thieves come after your money and all that?
Identity thieves and all that stuff?
Not LifeLock. LifeLock. 30 years and all of a sudden there is none for you.
Oh, yeah.
It's
Try to make you feel guilty about it, too.
It mailed a pair of handcuffs to the police department with the guy who stole the money with his name on it and pictures of all the evidence of how he swiped your money. LifeLock. Yeah, I mean, you figure that public company or private companies can do it, you know?
Hello there everyone, this is Dan Dix reporting for Press for Truth TV. The love of money is the root of all evil. This statement was written thousands of years ago and yet it still rings true today. The powers that be in the 21st century have enslaved the people of the world under a perpetual debt-based system where new money is created out of thin air through the practice known as fractional reserve lending. In order to have a solid understanding of how this current debt-based system operates, we must first look back at history to see where this all began. The first man to popularize the idea of lending out money that doesn't exist was Meyer Amschel Bauer. Meyer Amschel was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1743. He was the son of Moses Amschel Bauer, a money lender and goldsmith who decided to open up a new shop known as a counting house. Over the door leading into this shop, he placed a large red shield. At a very early age, Meyer Amschel Bauer showed that he possessed immense intellectual ability, and his father taught him everything he could about the money lending business. A few years after his father's death, Meyer Amschel Bauer went to work as a clerk in a bank owned by the Oppenheimers in Hanover. His superior ability was quickly recognized, and he quickly advanced within the firm. Shortly after his days at the bank in Hanover, he returned to Frankfurt, where he was able to purchase the business that his father had established in 1750. At the beginning of his empire, he decided to change his name. The sign on the front of his goldsmith's office, or bank, was a large red shield which was placed there by his father. And since this is where his legacy began, he decided to change his name to Rothschild, which is German for red shield.
Prosecution involved with the thief, but at least it stopped them from stealing your money. Like when they steal your identity, well, LifeLock goes after those that steal your whole entire life.
That would be the politicians.
They're swiping all your money,
I mean, unless you're dishonest.
promises they can't keep, they never intend to keep.
Right, you try to be
Then
honest.
they drop out of the house and run off to Rio or somewhere like that with all your money.
Yeah.
LifeLock, punch them all out.
Right.
Plenty of funding. We got LifeLock. We know you're busted, dude. You are busted.
Yeah,
well, those ones who bust all those politicians, there only be like 6 of them left.
Huh?
I guess I had to vote in honest people at that time. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, decent. I want it.
Suffer the consequences of doing so. Needless to say, the House of Rothschild had established itself as an incredibly wealthy, powerful, and secretive family. They were ruthless in all business ventures, and they still are to this day driven by an all-consuming lust for wealth and power. Biographer Frederick Morton tells us in his book, The Rothschilds, that Meyer Amschel Rothschild and his 5 sons were wizards of finance and fiendish calculators who were motivated by a demonic drive to succeed in their secret undertakings. As it sits today, the Rothschilds are the majority shareholders of the Bank of England and the American Federal Reserve, as well as many other central banks all over the world. However, here in Canada, it's a little different in the sense that our bank was nationalized and is therefore owned by the Canadian people. The Bank of Canada began its operations on March 11, 1935, after the passage of the Bank of Canada Act. The bank was originally founded as a private corporation. However, in 1938, Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King nationalized the bank and therefore put it in the hands of the Canadian people.
To give up this right to lend to ourselves is absurd, because what has happened? We've gone from an $18 billion deficit to up to a $588 billion deficit, of which about 95% of that is compound interest. And money, we're paying interest to who? Well, there's no person out there who has a Canadian flag, lives in Canada, who we pay $60 billion in interest, both federally, provincially, and at the municipal levels too. We're paying someone else interest on the money that we can print and produce ourselves and lend it to ourselves to fund our infrastructure, to fund our social programs, to fund our education for our university students who are also being put in a debt trap. But as you give up control of your currency, and William Lyon Mackenzie King said it most poignantly when he said this. He said, you know, the issuance of the credit and currency is the state's most precious resource. And once you give up that control, it matters not who makes the laws of the land, because usury, once in control, will wreak havoc on any nation.
Our bank charter states that we can print up to 50% of our own money at no interest. However, in the 1970s, the Bank of Canada began borrowing from private banks at interest, and this is the #1 reason for the exponentially growing debt bubble, which can never be paid off. The Canadian government only prints 5% of our money. The other 95% is created by private banks to whom we owe interest. So today we are going to be offering $5 of cold, hard debt to anyone who can answer our two-part question. What is money, and how is new money created?
I'm here to offer people $5 worth of debt if they can tell me the answer to this question. Where does money come from, and how is new money created?
Oh God. From trees?
In a factory by machines. Come from trees.
Well, the government is making the money, and they print it, and there's a bank, which I don't know the name of it, they print it there.
The government prints up the money, and it's taken, that money is taken, printed in Ottawa.
Controls it. Businessmen around King Street, all these guys, Front Street, all these guys, they're the ones that dictate what goes on.
I'll give you this $5 worth of debt, so I'm in debt to $5.
And I'm debt-free, $5 right now.
Money comes from the Canadian Mint, #1, and it's created by the government based on factors like inflation.
In a big factory place.
The banks can create money when money comes in as a deposit. They can create and loan out 10 times that amount. So that's one way that money's created.
And where does new money come from?
The government wills it into existence, don't they?
Pretty much. That's, I think, the correct answer. So,
sweet.
I'll give you $5 worth of debt for that. Where does money come from, and how is new money created?
Good question. Other than the mint, I don't really know.
What would you say if I told you 95% of our money is printed by private chartered banks, and then we pay interest on the money that private banks print for us?
I'd be surprised.
As far as I know, the Bank of Canada, it's an impotent institution today. Instead of the government borrowing from the Bank of Canada, we're borrowing from private banks and paying them interest. Why? It's so completely criminal.
The Canadian money? No idea, sorry.
Money comes from thin air, from the people who control the banks.
Here's $5 worth of debt.
All right.
The only way to get our system back on track is to stop borrowing public money from private banks and to begin borrowing it from the Bank of Canada, as was intended by William Lyon Mackenzie King. We must return the issuance of our currency back into the hands of the Canadian people.
Imagine you're lending someone money. Would you pay them to lend them money? In a normal world, if I lend you money, I want something in return. It costs money to borrow money. Now, can you imagine a world where I'm so desperate to lend you money that I'm willing to pay you to do it? That's the paranormal world we're living in today. It's pretty unbelievable, but it's just happened in Germany. The government auctioned off 2.9 billion euro in 6-month notes. The yields were negative. The investors paid the government to lend them their own money. This is in the era of the Eurozone debt crisis, of course, where people appear more concerned with the return of their money rather than a return on their money. But in the U.S., we've gotten used to this, right? With the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates near zero, for speculators, that means free money to go speculate. For savers, that's meant losing money to inflation as your money sits in the bank. Or if you're loaning the U.S. government money, the interest rates have been so low again, you're losing money to inflation. Now add to this uncertainty over bankruptcies of insolvent banks, the staggering $15 trillion U.S. debt, a government with no credible plan to attack it, and bills signed into law that allow indefinite military detention of American citizens. And all of that is why a lot of the investors we talk to privately tell us behind the scenes, they're looking to do this. Ways to plan their escape, to get their money safe and get the heck out of Dodge. Gonzalo Lira, founder and president of SPG Group, knows what we're talking about. He joins us from Switzerland. Gonzalo, it's so nice to have you on the show. Let me just start with Switzerland because you are there, and traditionally for generations, Switzerland's been considered a safe haven. You have people that have, there's been a lot of capital that's been kept in Switzerland. But since 2007, really, you've seen the United States crack down on Swiss banks. You've seen charges. You've seen revelation of client names. You also see some of these big banks that are highly leveraged and could arguably need a government bailout. Are traditional places like Switzerland safe havens anymore?
Well, thank you for having me on. Switzerland, for American citizens, is no longer a safe haven because, for all intents and purposes, it is impossible for anybody holding an American passport to open an account in Switzerland and deposit any money in Switzerland. Because the problem with UBS and the IRS, where the Internal Revenue Service of the United States obliged UBS Bank to hand over basically 5,000 names of American clients that UBS had. It started with Wegelin Bank, which is a private bank here, a very small but very prestigious bank, that shortly after the whole UBS IRS brouhaha, issued a letter saying that they were simply not going to take any more American citizens and not going to invest in the United States anymore. And that mantra has been taken up by every other private Swiss bank in this country. So Americans can't go to Switzerland anymore as a safe haven. But what they can do is go to other countries such as Panama, Chile, Austria, which is a little dicey for various reasons, Australia, New Zealand. There are other countries that are welcoming American capital, and there are a lot of people with a great deal of money in the United States who are quietly moving their money out of the United States and moving themselves out of the United States because they no longer feel that it is a trustworthy country.
So let's stop right there, Gonzalo, because I want to get into a number of issues. And I'm so glad you got to full circle to the reasons why people might want to take their money out of the United States. This is what you do for a living. You help people escape from countries they want to escape from, including the U.S. Personally, we hear from investors and financial analysts in private conversations all the time exactly what you're saying. People are worried about the safety of their money. They're worried about the government taking their money. They're looking for escape routes. They're looking for ways to get their money out, to get their money safe. I'm curious, you do this for a living. Have you seen an increase in the demand for people to either leave the U.S. or take their money out of the U.S. in, I guess, recent years?
Yes, most certainly, especially as of late after the whole MF Global fiasco. Because MF Global was a brokerage bankruptcy, which is not that uncommon. It has happened many times since 1930. But what was unique about the MF Global issue was that the federal regulators and the bankruptcy judge that handled that bankruptcy privileged JP Morgan over the customers. Now, this is key because what happened was that customers who had money with MF Global, who in other circumstances ordinarily should have gotten all of their money back, because they weren't having the money in play. They simply had it on deposit with MF Global, just as you or I would have money on deposit with a local savings and loan. Well, these customers lost their money to JP Morgan. The government privileged the bank over the individuals who had money, and they lost money that was rightfully theirs. Now, this is not money that they had on margin or that they had put on bets or anything like that. Rather, it was money that they simply had with MF Global, but that was theirs. Now, the problem is that these people are realizing that the right of private property in the United States is deteriorating because the government is privileging the too big to fail banks as opposed to regular citizens. Now, you have 40,000 customers who lost money.
Other bear guy, it's been a while.
What's with the bunny suit? You look ridiculous.
You know, I'm just hopping around. I hopped over here because I have a question to ask you.
You usually do.
Well, you seem to have all of the answers.
It's probably because our conversations are scripted in a computer program.
What?
Nothing. What did you want to ask me?
I heard a story on the news today about something called quantitative easing. I was wondering what that was.
Oh. It's intentional inflation created by the Federal Reserve Bank.
Inflation?
Inflation is creating new money and adding it to the circulation of money in the United States, leading to the increase of the prices of just about everything.
So why do they call it quantitative easing?
Why did they call it a no-fly zone in Libya and then start launching missiles at buildings?
Point taken.
Thank you.
Is inflation why it costs so much to put gas in my Hummer?
Ah, yeah, but that's probably not your key issue.
What do you mean?
Nothing. Do you understand now?
Sort of. Why would the Federal Reserve Bank want to raise prices for the American citizens? Isn't it a part of the federal government?
The Federal Reserve is a privately owned bank.
That doesn't make sense. It's called the Federal Reserve. You mean to tell me that they are just throwing the word federal in there to be clever?
Yes, that guy that delivers packages to your house works for a company called Federal Express. It doesn't make it a federally owned company.
Do you think that just because you're British, you can be a smartass?
Sort of, yeah.
It just seems like calling the bank that the government borrows money from the Federal Reserve, even though it's privately owned, is a bit misleading.
Yeah, it's the job of the top bankers to be misleading.
So then the Federal Reserve can just make new money whenever it wants to?
Not exactly. The government basically orders it.
Like at a restaurant.
That's actually a good metaphor. Let's go with that. You'll actually understand it if I explain it this way. Think of the federal government as a customer in a restaurant.
Applebee's.
Sure, Applebee's. Applebee's is the Federal Reserve. Now the government is done eating and its credit card is maxed out, but it decides it needs a little something extra, dessert in this case.
A sundae.
Yes, the government is going to order a sundae with the money it doesn't have. Applebee's will agree to make the sundae in exchange for the government's bonds.
What are bonds?
Bonds are worthless pieces of paper that the government gives to the Federal Reserve, or Applebee's in this case, that promises that it will pay back the money that is created out of thin air. But because the new money is created, or a sundae, the government is essentially paying the Fed the money it just created, ultimately leading to inflation, which I guess in our metaphor could be bloating.
I think I understand.
See if you can explain it to me now without Applebee's.
Okay, the government asks the Federal Reserve to make new money. The government gives the Fed bonds to ensure that the money created will be paid back to the Federal Reserve. The new money is created and eventually added to the currency circulation. The increase in money in the currency supply leaves no other option but to raise prices, and this is called inflation.
Great. So I can go home now.
You don't wanna hang out?
No, I certainly don't.
So why does the government keep creating more money?
Because the long-term effect isn't taken into consideration at the time. They just know they need the money for something right then.
So why aren't there countermeasures to prevent the government from doing this?
There was at one time. Before the Great Depression, all U.S. currency was backed by gold. This was called a gold standard. This is why you see so many places wanting to buy your gold lately. The American dollar is being progressively devalued, while gold remains a precious metal.
So you could trade money in for gold?
That's how the system was supposed to work. When money was required to be backed by gold, it was impossible to create new money out of nothing.
So why don't we have a gold standard anymore?
During the Great Depression, the Roosevelt administration did away with the gold standard so that Roosevelt could, you guessed it, create new money to support his New Deal.
But didn't the New Deal pull the United States out of the Depression?
It's generally believed now that World War II and its creation of jobs is what brought the Depression to a close.
Oh. So what does the Federal Reserve Bank get out of all of this?
They creating debt. The more debt created, the more money they can potentially make in the long run.
Wait, so the Fed creates debt intentionally?
Yes, many bankers do so. It's easy profit. Debt is part of the scam. It is literally impossible for everyone to be completely debt-free. Every dollar in every place is owed to somebody, somewhere. Money wouldn't move around if there was no debt.
I have a $5 bill in my wallet and I don't owe it to anyone.
No, but someone else owes it to someone. There is not enough money in circulation to pay off the total debt that is owed in the United States.
So is this a conservative and liberal debate?
Not really, no. Most people don't even realize many of the things I've just told you. It's more of a battle between American citizens and the most powerful bankers in the financial world. Many of the issues that Republicans and Democrats disagree on are minuscule and prevent the American people from focusing on the real issues in the modern world. While it is true that going back to a gold standard may seem like something a conservative might support, it's simply because conservatives prefer the government to spend less money, and if there is less money will be spent. Neither conservatives nor liberals want to pay more for gas.
Or education.
Or clothes.
Or Applebee's.
Yes, of course. That would be quite a shame.
So what can be done about this?
The Federal Reserve has to be exposed for what it is, a privately owned bank. The majority of Americans are under the impression that the government owns the Federal Reserve. If it is shown that the bankers at the Fed are just as corrupt and greedy as any other big-shot bankers, then there is a chance that the Fed could be ended.
And without the Fed, the quantitative easing would go away?
Exactly. If the government has no one to turn to ask for new money, inflation will slow down and possibly even stop completely. The rise in prices would level out and the economy could be in much better shape than it is now.
Why has this been allowed to go on for so long anyway?
People in the Federal Reserve has close ties to the federal government. Most of them used to either work there or helped government officials get elected.
The more I talk to you, the more I realize how twisted and unforgiving this world can be.
Why do you think I'm always so unhappy?
Do you wanna hunt Easter eggs with me?
Absolutely not. Who the hell even came up with the idea of a bunny hiding eggs?
That's pretty awesome. So, can you get me one of those? I'd like to have one of those.
Sometimes I see things through a box. Sometimes I see things through a circle. Sometimes I'm just plain blind. The fact is, there used to be something when I was a kid called the Great White Flight. That's where you have a neighborhood of white people. They're all happy. And a black family moves in the neighborhood. So 2 white families move out. And then 2 black families move in. And then 4 white families move out. And 4 black families move in. It's called the Great White Flight. A change in demography. No disrespect intended, it's just the way it was when I was a kid. It happened all the time in our neighborhoods. But nowadays, it's not a neighborhood thing. It's a national thing. And it's not white people versus black people. It's rich people versus poor people. Because the rich people are moving their money out of America. And the people who can afford it are moving out of America. And the corporations are shipping their jobs overseas because there isn't people over here who are qualified to do the work. Because they're all moving away, in theory. And immigrants are coming in to replace them. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I can't tell you. All I can tell you is I see things through a box. Does that make me a wizard? Hardly.
Focused on control of government once again. This is a nation of sovereigns. That means the nation of kings. From the beginning, the people of our nation recognized that God gave them dominion, agency and possession of their bodies and commanded them to multiply, replenish and subdue the earth. The three elements, dominion, agency and possession, constitute the very definition of sovereignty. Recognizing that the people formed our government by design to function of the people, by the people, and for the people. When I went to school, the part about of the people, by the people and for the people was still taught, but the sovereign part was already lost, and those that control the school system were in the process of eliminating the whole principle from their curriculum. This nation's government was created by a trust indenture contract called the Constitution for the United States of America. That document had only 7 articles. It had no amendments. The founders of the nation's Constitution created the trust with the authority the people gave to them, the authority to fix the problems they faced under the Articles of Confederation. The prime difficulty was that the Articles of Confederation were formed in a world made up of monarchies. Under it, the states were recognized as independent sovereign nation-states wielding the collective sovereignty of the people as if they were kingdoms unto themselves. The central government had no power to unite the states, settle disputes, set the standard of money, or even to marshal an army for defense of the nation. When the Revolutionary War was over, the nation and the states were nearing bankruptcy. Hard money was almost non-existent anywhere in the nation. The people were literally starving and the government had no way to generate funds to pay the army. Congress was left with no choice but to send the soldiers home with nothing but a worthless written promise that their pay for the previous 4 years would come. The people made deals with banks, merchants and private capitalists to borrow grain and seed on the promise that they would repay with their crops. Again, there was no money available. Before the year was over, the lenders went to the state legislatures to have the laws changed to compel the people to repay their grain loans in hard money, regardless of their contractual agreements. With the state's shaky financial condition and pressure from foreign lenders promising support if the legislation passed, the states changed the laws. When harvest time came, the banks refused to accept payment according to the terms of loans. The people could not sell their crops for hard money because there was none to be found, and the courts put the people in debtors' prison and foreclosed on their farms. Great Britain, France, Holland and Spain stood by gobbling up cheap land from such foreclosures, holding their ports closed to trade with American-based ships, dying for who would be the kingdom that would pick up the pieces and become the new rulers over America, while the independent states battled each other over borders, tariffs and control of the rivers. Something had to change or all would be lost. That's when the Constitutional Republic was born. Visionary men like Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, George Washington and the like petitioned the states to send representatives to Annapolis, then to Philadelphia, with authority from the states to fix the problem. The governors and/or state legislatures of the individual states each sent deputies with authority to speak for their state. They formed our Constitution to unite our nation under one law. Under the new Constitution, the states were no longer recognized as sovereign. The central government had the power to coin hard money and to regulate interstate commerce and foreign tariffs and trade. Still, the sovereign nature of the people was recognized. Our government was given the power to govern itself and the states according to specific limitations and law. It was not given power to govern the people. Acting as senators under the Constitution, the deputies sat George Washington in the seat of the President of the Constitutional United States of America. Note: they properly sat George Washington in that capacity, with their delegated authority, without a popular election. Once the constitutional republic was created in trust and the President and senators were seated, copies of the Constitution were distributed amongst the states for ratification. It is very important that we understand what ratification was. Could it have been that the individual states had to approve of the Constitution in order for it to have any effect? No. Ratification did not change the fact that the President and the Senate were already seated according to the Constitution. It was that each state had to recognize that they were giving up their alleged state sovereignty and all of their right and title to all of the unappropriated public lands within their state. It is impossible to control government if you have no idea of what government is. Today, what people generally see as the United States government is not a government at all. It is a private municipal corporation that was formed in the District of Columbia Organic Act of 1871, for the purpose of carrying out the business needs of the actual government acting under martial law. That corporation trademarked the names United States, U.S., USA, and America. We call it Corporation U.S. They adopted their own constitution, which did not include our nation's 13th Amendment, which amendment limited officers of government from raising themselves above the people. In 1913, Corporation U.S. started to have their corporation senators elected by popular vote, and the states stopped appointing national senators. In 1944, Corporation U.S. was deeded to the International Monetary Fund (IMF) under the Bretton Woods Agreement, codified at U.S.C. Title 22-286. Our nation's original jurisdiction constitutional republic government is vacant. It's vacant because people have forgotten who they are. It's vacant because we forgot what land ownership island. It's vacant because we stopped seating national senators. We forgot that electors are landowners. Our nation's government is vacant, and it's up to us to reseat it. The first step to reseating our government is understanding how it is seated in the first place. The Constitution of the United States of America shows the general popular vote of the people does not elect the president of this nation's government. The Electoral College does. The Electoral College must elect the president by a margin. The Senate reviews the Electoral College's presidential election, and only they can ratify the election and seat the new president. If they do not ratify the election, the Senate holds their own election and seats the president, which may be of their own choosing. Either way, the Senate always seats the president. Now, what would happen if there was no Senate seated? According to law, the president cannot be seated except by the Senate. As stated, when Corporation U.S. was formed, they adopted their Constitution as one of their charter documents. It was identical to the national Constitution, except that they dropped out the national 13th Amendment and renumbered the remaining amendments as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to their Constitution of the United States. That left their Constitution with one less amendment than the national Constitution. They fixed that by adding their own 16th Amendment without ratification to the corporation. Ratification was not necessary. After all, they created their Constitution in 1871 by adoption. What could keep them from doing the same thing with their corporate amendments? Then, in 1913, Corporation U.S. created their 17th Amendment, which removed the nature of Corporation U.S. governing relationships from a republic, like the nation is, to a democratic oligarchy, which form of government is repugnant to the laws of this nation. Therefore, their 17th Amendment had nothing to do with our national Constitution. Once Corporation U.S. inserted their 17th Amendment again without ratification and accordingly began seating their corporate Senate, the National Senate was vacated because the state legislatures and the state governors stopped seating national senators. By 1916, the National Senate stopped seating presidents. The result of this history is what we all see happening today. In our modern world, people think that Corporation U.S. is their government and they are contractually controlled by it with nearly no way out. Corporation U.S. has legislatively ruled that the people of our nation are its enemies. The Trading with the Enemy Act. There is even evidence of their own involvement in killing President Kennedy, killing people, the Weavers at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, the Seventh-day Adventist Branch Davidians at Waco, Texas, and thousands more, and participating in terrorism of the people, the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City, the World Trade Center, so that they can justify starting wars around the world and tighten security and control over the people of our nation. Remember, this nation was created by the people as a republic, the government controlled by law, not one that controls law and the people by its whim. Until the formation of Corporation U.S., the laws and statutes controlled the government, not the people. Now, the IMF, through its Corporation U.S. and the corporation states under its control, create thousands of statutes every year specifically designed to destabilize or systematically destroy our economy and force the people to only act under their will and control. Since WWII, the war against fascism settled by the Bretton Woods Agreement, we live in a country of government-controlled business, which is the very definition of fascism. We won the battle of conventional weapons, but we lost the war, and the fascists used our patriotism and will for peace to convince us to support them without noticing what had happened. Now that they have forced the new world of homeland security control over the people, the only step left for a complete takeover of the people and transference of government control under communism is for the people to revolt with arms. This is their long-range plan, now coming into effect. Where do we go from here? The only legal, lawful and peaceful way out is to put our constitutional republic government back in place. To do this, we are reseating the state governors. See our election map and page. Once the governors are in place, they can reseat any vacant seat. The governors will seat the senators. The Senate will seat the president. The president will seat the National Supreme Court and then demand that Corporation U.S. pays back the money Corporation U.S. owes to the national government. Corporation U.S. cannot pay. There is not enough money on the planet and they are already bankrupt. They have no legal or lawful choice but to recognize the original jurisdiction government as their owner, as the controller of Washington, D.C., and as the national government. We will have our nation with its republic back under the control of law and completely free of debt. We then put our monetary system back in place and eliminate the state of emergency that has been maintained as the controlling force over the people since the Civil War. There is also the alternative that from the pressure the people create upon our nation and upon Corporation U.S. to reveal the truth and to reseat the original jurisdiction government, the corporation could legislate and or regulate themselves legitimately back into lawful elections of the original jurisdiction government and reassume our lawful original jurisdiction constitutional republic government. We really don't care which way we get our nation back, so long as we get it back, and that our private sovereign rights to life, liberty and property are secured. The question still remains, how do you control government? Answer: this is a republic. In a republic, government is controlled by law. That obviously means that government cannot control the law. The law controls the government. The people entrust government with sufficient ability to deal with foreign governments and to assist the sovereign people with civil and criminal remedies against trespassers. The people are thereby left alone to control their own lives, lands and property, as sovereigns with their own sovereign land secured by land patents, against any kind of encroachment. May we see it through to the end. Text control.
That's pretty awesome, so can you get me one of those? I'd like to have one of those. Get me one of those and I'll let you drive my flying saucer.